Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy, and Anne Rice's vampires are different to the types of vampires you might have learned about as a kid. In this video, I'll be breaking down the different types of vampires we've seen or heard about in what I'm calling the AMC-verse so far. So that includes Interview with the Vampire, TALAMASCA, and the trailers we've seen so far for the Vampire Lestat. So please note, I will not be using book lore. I'll be following what the show has shown us so far only. If you enjoyed this video, please do think about subscribing so you never miss an upload. Okay, with that said, let's get into the different types of vampires in the AMC-verse. Okay, so the first type that I want to discuss are what I want to call mindless. They're a variant of an ancient revenant vampire. The characteristics are they're mindless, loyal, vicious, submissive to Jasper's cliques, primarily fed on the blood of chickens and other rodents, and they ooze a black substance from their mouths. Their fingernails are black, they are pale, and they have bloodshot eyes. These vampires are created by the vampire Jasper exclusively. Their strengths include they are very strong, they're ruthless, and they can climb vertically. The weaknesses are they're weakened and muzzled by iron, they're unable to think for themselves, and they're susceptible to fire and sunlight. An example of this type of vampire is Checkers from TALAMASCA. So Checkers, as a mortal, was a TALAMASCA agent. That's how he fell into the service of Jasper. He's based in London and has a second cousin in the Metropolitan Police. Okay, so the next type of vampires I want to discuss are what I'm going to call the weak vampires. Now, I say weak, but honestly, there really are no weak vampires. But in comparison to the rest of the vamps we're going to discuss today, they are the weakest. Okay, so some of the characteristics include they're not as physically strong as most vampires. However, they are fast and they are vicious. Often, the dark gift is forced upon them to control a person and their natural mortal gifts. For example, a spectacular memory. Or they may be made too young or too frail. Some of their strengths are that they are capable of a lot of damage to mortals, and they're particularly fast. Some of their weaknesses are they're susceptible to fire, sunlight, and will almost certainly lose in a fight against other vampires. Some are even unable to bestow the dark gift onto any others, and others are sadly prone to madness. An example of a weak vampire would be Doris, aka Emma, or the 752. So Doris was turned against her will by Director Houseman from the TALAMASCA. By making her immortal, the TALAMASCA tried to control her, and all that was contained in her incredible memory. Unlucky for them, she escaped. Another example would be Nicholas, aka Nicky. Nicholas was Lestat's first love, and they leave for Paris together. Nicky is a very gifted musician. He plays violin, and they find a home in a theatre troupe. It's with this theatre troupe that Nicky stays after Lestat is taken by Magnus and turned into a vampire. After being kidnapped and tortured by Aman's coven, Lestat rescues Nicky. Lestat then turns Nicky, his second fledgling, at Nicky's own request. Nicky seems to be driven mad by the depression and the potential mental illness that he suffered from as a mortal, and this was only enhanced by the dark gift. Sadly, things end for Nicky as he throws himself into a fire. My final example would be the vampire Claudia. Now, Claudia was Lestat's fourth fledgling. She was made entirely too young at the age of 14. Her pain and the realization that she would never physically age, despite her mind maturing, sets in after years of quite content family life. Isolated in their fragile trio, Claudia tries to make another vampire for herself, only to find out that she is unable. Claudia leaves for 7 long years. On her return, she and Louis spend 6 years bonding and recovering from the DV at the hands of Lestat. Years after Louis takes Lestat back, Claudia hatches and executes a plan with Louis to end Lestat, so that she and Louis will finally be free of him. The next few years are spent in Paris, where Claudia joins the Theatre des Vampires, the Paris Coven. She also meets her soon-to-be immortal companion, Madeleine. After a very short stint of happiness away from Paris with Madeleine, Claudia is sadly executed, along with Madeleine, by the members of the Paris Coven, after being betrayed by the vampire Armand. Okay, so the next type of vampires I want to discuss are the strong vampires. Now, most vampires fall within this range, but I have split this type up into two categories. The first is age strong. To fall within this category, a vampire would need to be more than 200 years old. They're often turned by a stronger or ancient maker. They're either born with or have the ability to gain really strong vampiric gifts. They can bestow the dark gift onto others, and they have longevity. Some of their strengths include super speed, strength, endurance, and crucially, they adjust well to the changing times. Their weaknesses include fire and sunlight. An example of this type of vampire would be Vasil. In Romania, in 1271, Vasil swears off human blood. He drinks only the blood of chickens. However, this act gets him banished from his coven. We next pick up with Vasil in the 1920s, and he's had a rough couple of centuries. Vasil discovers who betrayed him back in 1271. It turns out it was the vampire Magoo. So Vasil travels all the way to Bolivia and slaughters all but one member of Magoo's coven. Fast forward into 2025. Now, this is entirely speculation on my part, but I think Vasil might be being held by the London Coven and harvested for his blood. Well, that's his theory, but I have put it in there anyway. Okay, so the next example, although not as old as Vasil, is Gabriella. An 18th century mortal, Gabriella is turned by her son. Now, the trailers have hinted at the very, in my opinion, uncomfortable relationship that the two of them share, and it seems like it started when they were mortals. But as soon as Gabriella becomes Lestat's very first fledgling, she takes to being a vampire very quickly. It seems to fit her like a glove. As a vampire, Gabriella seems to finally be the version of herself she wants to be, and she leaves Lestat after very eventful years of companionship. But before she does, she acquires new skills and teaches them to Lestat. Now, I don't know what her special gift is going to be, and we don't know what her status is yet, but we're soon going to find out. She seems incredibly strong, and my prediction is that she'll be very adept at vampiric seduction. Okay, so next we have the vampires who are made strong. Of course, their powers increase with age, but the difference between vampires who age strong and are made strong is that there's often ancient blood that runs in the veins of these vampires from the moment they're made. Similar to vampires who age strong, vampires who are made strong have healing blood. And the sun loses its power after many centuries. They often need to feed less after many, many centuries as well. But they are still susceptible to fire. So an example of a vampire who is made strong is the vampire Armand. Now, I would like to add a reminder here that I'm talking solely about the show and not the book. So the summary that's on your screen now and everything that I mentioned is from the show, not from the book. So, Show Armand was mistakenly sold into slavery by his parents at the age of 15. His name was Arun then. He was later purchased from a brothel after suffering horrendously by the ancient vampire Marius the Romanus. Marius renames Arun Amadeo. And after Amadeo becomes sick at the age of 27, now sometime between 1527 and 1532, Marius finally turns him. Not long after this, the Coven in Rome sets Marius and his studio on fire. The fire doesn't kill Marius, but they take Amadeo. They rename Amadeo Armand, and they send him to Paris to reign over that coven after Magnus deserts them. Armand rules in Paris for over 400 years. And in the 18th century, Armand meets Lestat, Nicholas, and possibly Gabriella. And at that point, the coven evolves into the Théâtre des Vampires. In the 1940s, Armand meets Louis and Claudia in Paris, and falls in love with Louis. Armand ultimately betrays Louis, Madeleine, and Claudia by handing them over to the coven and directing the play in which they are put on mock trial, where Claudia and Madeleine are ultimately executed. Armand takes credit for saving Louis' life, and keeps quiet as Louis destroys most of his former coven. Louis and Armand spend the next 77 years in a stable but strained relationship. with Armand mind-wiping guards along the way to their favourite places so that they can access them. Right up until Daniel Malloy discovers that Armand had wiped both his and Louis' memories at least once and exposes his seismic lie to Louis. Armand then turns Daniel, the first vampire he's ever made. Another example of a made-strong vampire would be Louis Dupont du Lac. Now, Louis is the third vampire made by the Vampire Lestat, but he is Lestat's first fledgling after he drinks from Akasha. In New Orleans, at the age of 33, in 1910, Louis unintentionally catches the eye of Lestat. After a somewhat confusing courtship, Lestat exposes his true nature to Louis. After listening to Lestat speak, Louis shakily takes Lestat's head in his hands and accepts the dark gift right there at the altar. However, initially, Louis doesn't take to vampirism very well. Louis later begs Lestat to change a 14-year-old girl who he had just rescued from a burning building. Claudia and Louis have an instant and long-lasting bond. After Claudia leaves, Louis falls into a very deep depression. And after Lestat almost kills Louis by dropping him from 2 kilometers in the air upon Claudia's return, Louis and Claudia's bond deepens. However, Louis takes Lestat back after 6 years of constant and varied apologies. But the thing is, something's changed with them, something that they never get back. In 1940, Louis and Claudia conspire to end Lestat's life. However, Louis just can't allow Claudia to burn him. Louis and Claudia travel to Europe during World War II in search of other vampires. They get their wish in Paris, in the form of the Parisian Coven. Louis is immediately attracted to the Coven leader, Armand, and the two begin an undefined relationship, which later turns to companionship. Claudia and Madeleine ask Louis to turn Madeleine. Louis makes his first fledgling, in a good way. However, after the Coven discover what Louis and Claudia did to Lestat back in New Orleans, Armand betrays them by secretly directing the play and handing them over to the troupe to play their parts in the mock trial. Louis misses Claudia's and Madeleine's execution after Lestat saves him. Louis is driven mad and destroys nearly every member of the Coven in a murderous rampage. Armand takes Louis to see Lestat and they have a confrontation over Lestat's part in the death of their daughter. The conversation ends with Louis kissing Armand in front of Lestat and informing him that he will be with Armand from now on. Louis and Armand amass great wealth and travel the world together. In the 70s, they meet a young reporter in San Francisco. After their biggest fight, Louis walks out into the sun and Armand saves him. They fog the reporter's mind, Daniel, and continue on with their lives. Armand later removes the memory of Louis walking out into the sun from his mind. Louis becomes stronger as he ages and acquires more gifts. And in 2022, he contacts Daniel again to redo their original interview. Sun drugs. At the end of their 15 sessions, Daniel exposes Armand's lies and Louis leaves him for good. Not before warning him not to harm Daniel, a warning that Armand ignored. And our final example would be the vampire Jasper. Now, Jasper was a member of Margou's Coven back in 1920 as a boy, and Jasper was the one who discovered his massacred family after Vasil's rampage. He escaped to Central America and walked alone to Texas. After years of searching, Jasper found the dark gift, and he has been on a mission to bring down the TALAMASCA ever since. Now, Jasper is singular because not only does he have very ancient blood within him, or was raised by a very ancient vampire, he also has other skills where he's working on this pet project to create revenant vampires, his own version of them, something that we haven't seen any other vampire do in the show.
I'm quite sexy.
Okay, so in a category all of his own is our brat prince, the Vampire Lestat. And some of his characteristics are, he's bratty, vulnerable, strong, attractive to all, he's a performer, and a lover. Lestat received a dark gift at the age of 34, back in the 18th century. He was abducted in the middle of the night by the vampire Magnus. He was quickly abandoned by Magnus, with not much more than a huge inheritance and some really sparse survival instructions. Lestat later drinks from the source of all vampires, and his already considerable gifts are enhanced. Plus, he gains some more powers too. Now, Lestat is imbued with every power that I've listed in this video so far. However, fire cannot kill him, unless he's willing. Now that's something specific to Lestat. He also has the strength of Akasha in him. And I would say that Lestat's weakness, well, it's Louis. Now, Lestat is undeniably strong, and we're about to hear every single detail that Lestat is willing to share with us in Season 3, The Vampire Lestat. And I, for one, cannot wait to hear his version of events, directly from his perspective. So until then, I believe that this summary would be incomplete if I even attempted to break it down here. So I'm going to wait until we've heard directly from him, and then try to summarize his story, a summary that might do it justice. And finally, we have the ancient vampires. Now, so far, we haven't met a truly ancient vampire in the show, that we know of, just yet. But to qualify as an ancient, I would say that a vampire needs to be a minimum of 2,000 years old. Now, the origins of the ancients haven't been established in the show just yet, so we can't break down their strengths and their weaknesses. But an example of an ancient is Marius. Now, we've heard of Marius the Romanus. We know that he was the one who purchased Armand back in the 16th century from the brothel. We know that he was an artist. And other than that, we don't know much more of him from the show. However, we do know that he is exceptionally powerful, and the power that runs through his blood is exceptionally powerful too. Now, we know that we will be introduced to Marius in Season 3, and I just cannot wait. And then finally, we have the source of all vampires. Now, we know of Akasha, but Akasha comes with Enkil. Now, they haven't been described or seen in the show just yet. Lestat did let something slip back in Season 1, when he really didn't want to go anywhere near Greece, because of those who must be kept. We know that Akasha can't be killed by fire because she passed that trait on to Lestat after he fed on her. And again, we know we're going to meet Akasha because she has been cast for Season 3. And I have no idea when she's going to appear in the show, but I'm so intrigued. I mean, she is one of the characters that we haven't even seen in the trailers yet. So I think it's going to be a big deal. And that's everybody. That's all of the types of vampires that I can pick out in the show. If I've missed anything out, please let me know. And thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe and I'll see you in my next one. Thank you. Bye.